This question around have you been terminated or been fired or been asked to resign, all are things about you've lost your job that wasn't your choice. You were basically let go from the company. Usually doesn't come up much, or else it's a perfunctory question just to ask it and then somebody says no and then they move on. Unless there's something on your resume or your CV that might indicate a gap in employment or something that's a little unusual where they want to ask and clarify that as far as, did you ever involuntarily leave an organization? Another aspect of that too is they might already know that you've left an organization or that you've been laid off or you've disclosed that in earlier interviews or for whatever reason, and that's okay. Just understanding that's where they're asking that question from. So if you've never been asked to leave involuntarily, asked to resign, terminated, fired, whatever the terminology, the answer to that is just a short no. You don't go into a whole thing. No, I've never been asked that because I'm wonderful and spend 10 minutes on that. Just a short, quick, nope, I've never been asked that. I've been a great employee in all my places I've worked at. I've never been asked to resign. Or just a short, nope, I've never had that happen with me. And just leave it at that if it's a no. If it's a yes, where maybe you've been asked to resign or laid off or something of that nature, then you got to kind of think about that a little bit. Some companies do better background checks than others. Some companies, will talk to previous employers, and sometimes your previous employer won't volunteer any information for fear of getting a lawsuit against them, hurting you, for example. So weigh that, but really, once again, I talk about honesty, is talk about if there's ever been a case, you might say, yeah, 10 years ago, I was laid off from this company. In fact, my whole division was laid off. Maybe it's something where it's a mass layoff. Or maybe you did make a mistake or something like that. And you could talk about yeah, I did this thing, I made a mistake, but I really learned from it. And now, now I'm really ready to move forward in my career. And I've had these other jobs since then. And it's actually been a great blessing for me, though at the time it was kind of tough, right? So you're talking about those types of things and really practicing this question. If you've been laid off or fired or something like that, understand companies lay off people all the time, particularly during that 2008, 2009 time of the Great Recession. There's lots of people experiencing that same boat, particularly your interviewer might have experienced that as well. So, it used to be like the stigma, oh, you got fired. It's not as bad as it used to be, but you have to be able to answer that question well. So if it hasn't happened to you, it's a simple no. But let's say it has. And here's an example of how maybe to handle that. Well, I've progressed in my career very well. I've always had a lot of success wherever I've been. But 10 years ago with ABC Company, there was a situation I got caught up in where I was a top performer, got great performance reviews, but they really laid off everybody in my entire department because they outsourced all of that to another country. And that was a cost savings measure, and they offered us other positions and things, but I declined that because I wanted to, really move on with my career. I never really saw a future with that company, so I took a risk and left that company and then went to work for, as you saw on my resume, the XYZ company. But it was really not something I was terminated oh, I did a bad thing or anything. It was just part of a general layoff. And then I chose to take the severance package and leave the company. I could have stayed, great performer, but decided to move on. So you can see in that example, and that's probably maybe a better case example where it's hey, they laid off everybody, the whole department closed. Here's the actions I took. I even took a risk by being confident in my career. See how I kept throwing in things like my performance reviews were great. I've been a great employee. I wasn't let go because of performance. I was let go because I was caught up in this whole other thing. If it's something that is related to performance, or God forbid you stole from the company or something like that, you're going to have to practice this question even more to kind of lessen that blow. The key thing is people understand that folks get laid off, fired. It happens to many people. A lot of great people get laid off, no big deal. But if it's something that's a little bit more concerning or a red flag, make sure you're able to really explain that very, very well and show to your potential employer how it won't be an issue for them and how you can be a great employee. Focus on what you do great with this little bit of yeah, this happened to me. And once again, if it's never happened to you, great, just say no.